Right now, a 50-year financial arrangement that's been quietly funding the American way of life is coming undone. Most people have no idea it even exists, let alone that it's ending. But here's what I know after decades of watching how monetary systems shift. The people who figure this out early don't just protect their money. They end up on the right side of one of the biggest wealth transfers of our lifetime. I'm going to show you exactly what's happening. Stay with me. Let me start with something that most financial coverage gets flat out wrong. When people talk about the dollar losing its grip on the global economy, they point to BRICS countries trading in local currencies, to China cutting oil deals outside the dollar, to Russia and India settling energy payments without touching the US financial system at all. And yes, those things are real. But here's the part that almost no one is saying clearly enough. Those developments are symptoms. They are not the cause. The dollar's foundation is not being chipped away from the outside. It is softening from within. And once you understand why, you'll know exactly where money is moving next, including into a corner of the map that most American investors haven't seriously looked at in over 60 years. If you have money in a 401k, in stocks, in bonds, or in savings you're counting on for retirement, this is the most important structural story of the next decade, not because it means a crash, but because it means a lasting, fundamental shift in where value is created and where it gets stored. The investors who understand the mechanism will end up in a very different position than those who only catch up after the fact. Let me walk you through exactly what's happening and why. Stay with me here. I'm going to show you the actual mechanism underneath the headlines. This is the part most analysts skip. The original deal that built the modern dollar. To understand what's changing, you have to understand what was built in the first place. In 1974, coming off the shock of the Arab oil embargo, and just 3 years after Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility to gold, the United States struck a quiet but transformative agreement with Saudi Arabia. The terms were straightforward. Saudi Arabia would sell its oil exclusively in US dollars and recycle the resulting dollar surpluses back into US Treasury bonds. In exchange, America would provide military protection, security guarantees, and political backing. The other major Gulf producers fell in line shortly after. What that arrangement created was a form of global demand for dollars that was structural and essentially non-negotiable. Every country that needed oil, and every industrial economy on Earth needed oil, had to hold dollars first. And the most sensible place to park those dollars was U.S. government debt. So for 50 years, foreign central banks, sovereign wealth funds, and oil-producing nations were in effect a permanent and reliable buyer of American debt. That kept Treasury yields lower than they ever would have been otherwise. Lower yields meant lower borrowing costs. For the U.S. government, yes, but also for every mortgage, every car loan, every business expansion in America. The entire financial architecture of the last half-century was built on top of that single, quietly maintained arrangement. Here's where the story takes a turn most people haven't connected yet. What's actually different now? The United States is now the single largest oil and gas producer on the planet. It has surpassed both Saudi Arabia and Russia. It is a net energy exporter. That single fact changes everything about the original deal. Think about the logic of 1974 for a moment. America needed Saudi Arabia to stabilize oil markets and secure supply. That need created the incentive to protect them, to garrison the Gulf, to make their security America's problem. When that need weakens, the incentive to maintain those arrangements weakens right along with it. You don't have to become isolationist. The arithmetic just shifts. And what you're watching play out in American foreign policy right now, the tolerance for instability in the Middle East, the gradual repositioning of military and diplomatic focus toward the Western Hemisphere, the reduced urgency around the Strait of Hormuz, that is not confusion. That is a system in transition behaving exactly the way transitioning systems behave. Slowly at first, then all at once. The countries that are now trading oil outside the dollar are not causing this transition. They are responding to it. The enforcement mechanism that held the old system together is loosening, and everyone can feel it. Now here's what this means for your actual money, and why the risk is hiding somewhere most people aren't looking. The hidden risk sitting in your retirement account. The petrodollar recycling loop was the primary engine of demand for US Treasury bonds for 50 years straight. When that demand shrinks, Treasury yields have to move higher to attract whoever is left in the buyer pool. And when yields rise on a national debt load pushing toward $40 trillion, the math gets uncomfortable fast. The Congressional Budget Office has already projected that annual interest payments on federal debt will exceed the entire U.S. defense budget before the end of this decade. That is not a theoretical concern sitting somewhere in the distant future. That is the current trajectory, baked into the numbers right now. Here is the part that directly affects everyday investors. A lot of people in their 50s and 60s, people who have spent decades building their retirement savings, hold substantial amounts of fixed income in their portfolios, often without fully realizing how much exposure they have. Bond funds, inside target date retirement accounts, government bond ETFs, long-duration investment-grade holdings. These are the assets most directly in the path of structurally rising yields. And I want to be precise about something important here, because this distinction matters enormously. A cyclical yield increase is what happens when the Federal Reserve raises rates to cool an overheating economy and then cuts them again when things slow down. Those are manageable. You've seen them. You hold, you wait, the cycle turns. A structural yield increase is fundamentally different. It happens when the underlying base of demand for an asset is permanently smaller than it used to be. When the Petrodollar recycling mechanism was the consistent marginal buyer of treasuries for decades and that mechanism is now contracting, you don't get relief by waiting for the Fed to cut rates. The buyer pool has shrunk. The yield has to compensate. That adjustment moves in one direction, and it takes years to fully price in. That is the environment we are entering right now. The next part is where this gets genuinely surprising. There's a geographic pivot happening that almost nobody is connecting to their investment strategy. America is pivoting south. And it's not subtle. The United States is in the middle of the most significant geographic reorientation of its economic and strategic posture in a generation. The direction is inward and southward. Closer supply chains, resource relationships that don't run through contested shipping lanes on the other side of the world. A hemisphere-first approach to energy security and critical materials. Venezuela is part of this story. It holds some of the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, and its heavy crude happens to be exactly the grade that Gulf Coast refineries were originally built to process. The political and economic pressure being applied to Caracas, the quiet conversations about normalized energy investment, none of that is accidental. It fits a coherent strategic logic. But Venezuela is really just the opening chapter. The deeper story involves something sitting just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. This next part is going to sound unexpected. Stay with it, because the strategic logic is airtight once you see the full picture. The island nobody is talking about, but should be Cuba. I understand that sounds like a strange place to anchor an investment thesis in 2025, so let me be specific about the economics, because this has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with resources. The modern global economy runs on a specific set of critical minerals. Cobalt for battery cathodes, nickel for electric vehicle drivetrains and industrial applications, copper for every data center, every EV charging network, every renewable energy installation on Earth, rare earth elements for the permanent magnets inside wind turbines, electric motors, and advanced defense systems. These are the physical raw materials that the artificial intelligence economy, the electrification economy, and the next generation of military technology all require in massive and rapidly growing quantities. Cuba is the 5th largest cobalt producer in the world. It holds some of the most significant nickel deposits in the entire Western Hemisphere. It has meaningful copper and rare earth resources, and virtually none of those deposits are developed anywhere close to their productive capacity. For one straightforward reason. The country has been locked out of international capital markets and modern mining investment for over 60 years. Now consider the competitive landscape. China currently controls roughly 60% of global rare earth processing capacity. It has spent 2 decades systematically securing cobalt supply through investments in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It has pursued nickel in Indonesia and the Philippines. The competition for critical mineral supply chains is the defining resource contest of this era, not oil, which America now produces abundantly, but the inputs to the technologies that will determine economic and military power for the next 50 years. A Cuba with normalized trade relations, with American and allied capital flowing into its underdeveloped mineral sector, with U.S. companies building the port infrastructure and processing facilities that decades of embargo have prevented, is not a geopolitical curiosity. It is a strategic asset in a competition that China has been winning largely uncontested for 2 decades. Look at the sequence of recent developments with fresh eyes. The sustained financial pressure on Venezuela, which was Cuba's primary energy supplier, the aggressive isolation of Iran, which provided meaningful economic support to Havana. These moves have systematically removed the external support structures that allowed the Cuban government to maintain its distance from the international financial system. Whether or not that is the intent, that is the effect. And the historical pattern of how these situations eventually resolve, Eastern European infrastructure investment before the Berlin Wall came down, capital positioning in Venezuela before its political picture clarified, suggests that patient early positioning has historically been worthy. Meaningful returns were captured. Let me pull this all together now and tell you what it actually means for how you position your money. What smart money is actually doing right now. Every major monetary transition in history produces a wealth transfer. Not because markets are rigged or because anyone is a victim, simply because different assets hold their value differently across a transition. The investors who understand which assets are which, before the headlines spell it out, end up on a very different side of that transfer than those who adjust after the fact. Here is the honest breakdown of what this transition means for different types of assets. Long-duration US Treasury bonds and investment-grade fixed income face real structural headwinds. I'm not saying these instruments go to zero. I'm saying their expected returns over the next decade look meaningfully worse than their historical average, and their risk profile is higher than most retirement planning models currently assume. If your portfolio is heavily weighted toward bonds, because someone told you that's the conservative play, it is worth taking a harder look at that assumption. The dollar itself will face sustained, persistent pressure. Not a collapse. The dollar remains the dominant global reserve currency and will not be displaced quickly. But a gradual devaluation against hard assets is the most probable path forward, because the structural demand that the petrodollar system created is contracting. What a dollar buys, in real terms, in energy, in metals, in food, in services, will keep declining. Hard assets benefit from exactly this kind of environment. Gold has preserved value across every monetary transition in recorded history. When the Bretton Woods system collapsed in 1971 and the dollar was cut loose from gold convertibility, gold moved from $35 an ounce to over $800 by 1980. Not because the world ended, because the anchor that had suppressed its price for 25 years was lifted. The petrodollar system served as a secondary anchor, creating artificial structural demand for dollars and keeping hard asset prices lower than they otherwise would have been. As that anchor loosens, the same dynamic applies. Mining equities with exposure to critical minerals, cobalt, nickel, copper, rare earths, are in the early stages of what I expect to be a multi-year repricing. The demand case is not speculative. It is the physical requirement of electrification and AI infrastructure build-out that is already underway. Supply responses in this sector take years to materialize. That gap between demand certainty and supply constraint is historically where patient investors have found the most durable returns. Infrastructure and construction exposure in the Western Hemisphere, the companies that will build the ports, the processing facilities, the energy networks of a reshored American supply chain, represents a longer duration opportunity. These are not trades. They are positions in a structural reorientation of where American capital flows and where American economic relationships are anchored over the next generation. One final thought. This one reframes everything. The honest assessment of where we are. The greatest monetary transitions in history have always moved the same way. Slowly, then suddenly. The Bretton Woods system took decades to build and years to quietly unravel before its end became undeniable. The petrodollar arrangement was constructed quietly in 1974 and funded American prosperity for 50 years. Now the foundations underneath it are shifting, not because of an external attack, but because the conditions that made it work in the first place have changed. We are still in the slow phase of this shift. The headlines haven't caught up to the mechanism yet. The people who understand what's actually happening, who can read the underlying forces rather than just reacting to the news, have a window right now that won't stay open indefinitely. The investors who repositioned early coming out of 1971, who recognized that hard assets would reprice as the dollar's real purchasing power declined, built generational wealth over the decade that followed. The people who understood in 1974 that the petrodollar arrangement would create persistent structural demand for U.S. financial assets adjusted their portfolios accordingly and benefited for 50 years. We are at a comparable inflection point today. The transition will take years to fully play out, not weeks. But the direction is clear to anyone looking at the mechanism underneath the headlines rather than at the headlines themselves. If you found this analysis useful, subscribe. I'll keep working through these cycles carefully and sharing what I see as clearly as I can. Because the petrodollar era built enormous prosperity for a lot of Americans, and understanding how it ends is the first step to navigating what comes next.